fourth graders, meet your ELA team. I'm Mrs. Reeder, and that's Dr. Fishman. We have Mrs. Cece and Mrs. Attic. We wanted to do our first video here together so you could see all of our faces without our masks. And without further delay, Mrs. Attic is going to kick it off for us.
All right, readers. Today we're going to read intensely and learn what that means. But first, before we can start, I need you to gather several things. First, you need your independent choice book. This book will be something you're going to use over several days, so make sure you gather one that you really want to read. Next, you need your composition notebook. You will also need a pencil and some Post-it notes. So pause your video and go and gather those things. All right, now that we're back, let's think about what it means to read intensely. Well, first, we need to think about ourselves as third grade readers and how we're going to grow that this year as fourth graders. This year, we're going to grow fourth grade ideas about books. We're going to grow these into sturdy, grounded ideas that are in the text based on evidence. You're going to grow many solid ideas. Today, we're going to teach you that to grow solid, grounded ideas, people read intensely, aware that everything counts. They often reread to see more, notice more. Readers use all their brain power and strategies to pay extra attention to what they are reading. So we're going to think about that through the rest of our work in this lesson. First, we're going to look at some of those strategies to grow and read intensely.
Readers, just like Mrs. Attic said, your job today is to help me think of some ways that we can tell if we are reading intensely. After all, just like you, I have to get ready for my conversation with my daughter-in-law about the book that I've been reading. And in order to do that, I need your help to figure out what a person does when he or she is reading intensely. I mean, you just can't stare at the text. That's not going to get you anywhere. What exactly do you think that readers do when they're reading intensely? I'm sure that we can tell from their facial expressions and their posture and so forth, but what I'm asking you to do is pause for a moment, just pause the video after you've had some time to think about what is it that readers are doing while they're reading intensely. If we want to grow substantial ideas that are grounded in the text so we can have great conversations with our partners about what we've been reading, how can we tell whether we're reading intensely? Earlier, I listened to some kids describe some ways that they can help themselves read intensely. The first way they talked about was finding a book that they really wanted to read. Have you ever maybe ordered online or pre-ordered a book that was next in a series? I remember a lot of people lining up outside the Barnes & Noble store at midnight to wait for the next Harry Potter book to be released. So one thing you can do to make sure you're reading intensely is to find that great book that makes you want to read it. I'm wondering if you thought about this idea, reading as if you were in the book. I've heard students describe before that if they're reading a book that has a very frosty, frigid setting in the North Pole, they actually, even though it might have been the middle of summer, they needed to wrap that blanket around themselves. So readers, when you are reading intensely, check to see if you feel like you're actually in the book. Another student told me that sometimes she just reads kind of drifting along in the book, but there was one book she read intensely, and the difference was that she took the time.
At this time, please dismiss.
To figure out the confusing parts or the parts that surprised her or that helped her realize something. I wonder whether some of you readers also thought about maybe jotting down or noting the important things that you can talk about with your partner later on. So if you're reading a great book and you're reading intensely, while you're actually reading, not afterwards, but during the time that you're reading, you could be taking some short phrases or writing some short sentences on a Post-it note, because it's going to remind you of important things you can talk about later. Now, I want you to return to the read aloud with Mrs. Cece today and see what she has in store for you.
Hi, boys and girls. We are going to dive back into our Tiger Rising first couple chapters and first couple pages that we read. And today I'm going to reread to you some of the first 2 pages of Tiger Rising. And I want our job to be today to make note of things that are surprising, things that are confusing, or things that you realize. And we might not notice a lot of those things since this is just the first couple pages of the book. But as we're reading, I'm going to stop along the way myself and jot some things down that I notice as I'm reading. And I want you to do the same. Okay, so I have the text in front of you there, and I'm going to read it aloud as well. And I'm going to stop every now and then just to make sure that I'm realizing anything that's surprising or confusing or something that I'm realizing as I'm reading. Okay, all right, here we go. Chapter 1. That morning, after he discovered the tiger, Rob went and stood under the Kentucky Star Motel sign and waited for the school bus just like it was any other day. The Kentucky Star sign was composed of a yellow neon star that rose and fell over a piece of blue neon in the shape of the state of Kentucky. Rob liked the sign. He harbored a dim but abiding notion that it would bring him good luck. Finding the tiger had been luck. He knew that. He had been out in the woods behind the Kentucky Star Motel, way out in the woods, not really looking for anything, just wandering, hoping that maybe he would get lost or eaten by a bear and not have to go to school ever again. That's when he saw the old Beauchamp gas station building, all boarded up and tumbling down. Next to it, there was a cage. Okay, at this point, I want you to stop your video and I want you to jot some things down that are surprising, confusing, or things that you're realizing at this point in the story. So take a minute, pause your video, and then when you have some things jotted down, hit play again and we'll share to see if we have some of the same things. Okay. I wanted to share with you a few things that I found when I was reading just this first page. I can't believe that he found a tiger out in the middle of the woods. That's really surprising. Okay, not what I would expect him to find if he's just wandering in the woods to come across a real live tiger. That's pretty surprising for him. Another thing that I found surprising too, or that I'm wondering, is what does this Kentucky Star sign? Why would it bring him good luck? Okay. All right, let's take a look. Let's continue on. Maybe you had some of the same thoughts. Maybe you had something different, but we're just jotting down as we're reading. Unbelievably, there was a tiger, a real life, very large tiger pacing back and forth. He was orange and gold and so bright it was like staring at the sun itself, angry and trapped in a cage. It was early morning and it looked like it might rain. It had been raining every day for almost 2 weeks. The sky was gray and the air was thick and still. Fog was hugging the ground. To Rob, it seemed as if the tiger was some magic trick rising out of the mist. He was so astounded at his discovery, so amazed that he stood and stared, but only for a minute. He was afraid to look at the tiger for too long, afraid that the tiger would disappear. He stared, and then he turned and ran back into the woods toward the Kentucky Star. And the whole way home, while his brain doubted what he had seen, his heart beat out the truth to him. tiger, tiger, tiger. And I'm going to stop right there. Okay. Take a minute, stop, and jot what are some thoughts that you have as you're reading? What's surprising you so far? Is there anything that's confusing you at this point? Is it making you realize something at this point? So hit pause on the video, take a minute, and we're going to stop and jot our thoughts down. And then I'm going to share out maybe some of my thoughts as I'm reading as well. Okay, so let's take a look. When I was reading this last paragraph or two, I said, what is the tiger doing out in the middle of the woods in a cage? It's so surprising that he would just all of a sudden stumble upon a tiger out in the middle of the woods as he's just wandering. So I'm surprised that he's there, and I'm also wondering, what is he doing in the middle of the woods? Okay. Maybe you have some of the same thoughts. Maybe you had different thoughts. But remember, we're supposed to be reading intensely as we're reading and making sure we're stopping and jotting things that come to mind as we're reading our text, whether it be your independent reading book or as we're reading Tiger Rising and we get going in these next couple chapters. You're going to start to realize that there are things that could definitely surprise you, things that you might be confused about, and things that might just, that you just have connections to. All right, that's it for today. Okay. And we're going to continue with the book as we get going later on in this unit.
Okay, back to me. We're going to get you started now on what you're working on during reading workshop today. We are going to be reading intensely. That's our goal today. Good readers read intensely. So this is your digital reading journal. This is the first bend of lessons. We have several lessons. So this is lesson 1. If you need a shortcut, this is the second slide for you. You can just tap here on lesson number 1. Oops. Yeah, let's go this way. I'm not presenting right now. Let's go this way. Okay, so this is your own anchor chart right here in your notebook. This reminds you to read intensely to grow ideas. So these are some of the things we talked about in the lesson today, and this is right here in your notebook. We're going to be adding to this as the lessons go on in this first bend of lessons. So hopefully we've all found a book that we want to read, because you want to get really into it, get really intense. We want to read as if we are in the book. We want to figure out the confusing parts, and we want to note things to talk about later. So as you read today, you're noting on real Post-it notes things that surprise you, things that confuse you, things that made you realize something you want to discuss later, a question you have. So you're going to be noting things as you read intensely today. So we want to have some really good conversations later. You want to have good Post-it notes as you read intensely. So you're going to jot ideas. This next slide is to remind you exactly what to do. We just talked about this. So today, you're going to read your book intensely using strategies from our chart. We're going to stop and jot notes as we read on Post-it notes, noting important parts that you want to talk about later. So here's an example Post-it note. This is where your thought's going to be. You will be using actual real Post-it notes. All right, so that is what we are going to be working on today. So make sure to read intensely. We can't be slouching or relaxing too much. This isn't a relaxing kind of read. This is a reading intensely. So sit up tall, be alert, and be ready to read intensely today. I think that is everything I need to remind you. Let's go do the good part now. Off you go to read.